Thank you, ladies. I think that that was such a beautiful segue into our last session here together today. And before I introduce this regenerative leadership workshop, I want to express gratitude for our deep collaborative partners on the Women Leading Regeneration Summit nRhythm. We really came to nRhythm and recognize that, you know, we love putting on these summits. We love creating these spaces like everyone shared. It's this beautiful, safe space, this brave space. It creates so much connection. And then we all disperse. And we truly wanted to hold this deep intention this time to co-create what it would look like to continue to collaborate and create a space that empowers women to deepen into our leadership and deepen into our support amongst each other in being leaders in this movement, and as well as the movement as a whole. So we worked together to design a 1-month workshop that follows up this summit. And we're going to invite up Alex of nRhythm and Sherry Hess, who is a current nRhythm fellow, to give us a little regenerative leadership workshop that will create the space for each of us to really deepen into, you know, what does leadership mean for us, and how can we explore some of nRhythm's frameworks to see that.
And so Jen, is she out sick?
Yes, and Jen has COVID right now, so she was not able to join.
The whole nRhythm team has COVID. They were all together in Boston. So Tay was supposed to be with me here, and we're not able to be hosting from the same space. Sherry, are you COVID free?
I am COVID free. Luckily, I've only been virtually meeting with the nRhythm team.
Well, bless your hearts, and thank you for showing up, Alex. Really appreciate this conversation you guys are going to lead us through. Thank you.
Yes, it's an honor to be here today. So thank you so much to all of you for showing up and spending the time with us today. And then also, it's been such a pleasure collaborating with the Regenerative Rising team over the several months to put this on. And I am just thrilled by the conversations today. I have so many notes, and it's an honor to be here with you all. So just to give a little bit of a preview of where we're going to go, this is going to be a little bit different than the other sessions that we have. But before I do that, I don't know if Sherry, you want to give a brief introduction to yourself, and just to kind of ground us in who we each are in this context.
Sure. So I am fortunate enough to be part of the nRhythm Fellowship, which is a year-long program to be able to work with the nRhythm team. And so we're 4 months in at this point, and I have participated in several different sessions, including the Regenerative Design Lab, which has been just mind-blowing. My business is the Flavor Remedy, and I'll get into that a little bit more when we kind of highlight what this program has done for me. But it's just been phenomenal. And talk about hope. The nRhythm principles and everything that we've been doing has brought me so much hope. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for letting me join in. And I do miss Jen. I hope she feels better soon.
No, I will send her everyone's best wishes. So yeah, my name is Alex. I'm on the nRhythm team, and nRhythm's a global design and management firm that takes a regenerative approach. And my role is really as an operations manager, and I also lead our design workshops, whether it's our leadership programs or our design labs. And I come to this work through just many years of spending time and working in and leading in the nonprofit space, as well as in the social impact space. And I just started to notice the conditions were really unhealthy. And even though we were trying to do this great work in the world, internally, our cultures and the way that we were working really wasn't creating life, even though we're trying to create life on the land and in our communities. So that's what got me really inspired about nRhythm. And so I'm really excited to lead you all through a little bit of a workshop today. But I don't see, Tay, I don't see the share screen option. So I'm panicking over here. Do I need special permissions?
Rachel, does Alex need special permissions?
Or alternatively, I did email you my presentation, Tay.
Oh, awesome.
It's only going to be,
you have to make somebody a host and then they'll be able to share.
you do. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's-
Rachel, could you make Alex a co-host?
Alex, I'm having flashbacks of my design principle presentation. Like,
Oh, I still don't see the option.
Okay.
Would you be able to share your screen? For me?
Yes,
Yeah, let's have you share the screen. Thank you.
of course.
While you pull it up, I'll give a bit of a preview. So what we're planning for our short workshop today together is to give a brief intro of what we mean by regenerative leadership. And I'm so excited because so many of the themes have been coming up in the context of female leadership. Then we're going to hear a story from Sherry about her leadership journey, which I'm really excited about. And then we'll go into some reflection time. We'll stay a big group. Each of you are going to have the chance to reflect on your own leadership journey. And then we'll have some time for discussion. We can bring people up into the spotlight. So if anyone feels called and inspired to share, you'll be invited to come up with us. And then we'll end with an invitation, which Tay was sharing a little bit about. Oh, awesome. This is total flashback to Sherry, that time that you were presenting. Do that. So awesome. Thank you, Tay, for jumping in. I think this is a big expression of a beautiful support that we can provide one another as women. So next slide. So, we hope you, by joining us in this workshop today, are able to reimagine leadership through a regenerative lens. We hope you're intrigued by Living Systems' approach to organizational design and management and leadership, that you're inspired to weave this into your work, and that we spend a little bit of time examining our life experiences with leadership through a regenerative lens. And I want us to just point out that anyone can be a leader. Oops, almost. Anyone can be a leader. You're good. If you're someone who works with other people in any capacity, if you're shaping your career, wherever you're at, you don't need a title to be a leader. So I just wanted to call that out because sometimes I feel like that word can be intimidating to some, and I know it's been intimidating to me in the past. So I just wanted to kind of offer that into the space of each one of us in our own ways can be leaders. Next slide. So this is kind of an invitation to reimagine leadership through regenerative lens, but why on earth would we do that? And this is a quote from Annie Dillard. She said, "How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives." And so ultimately, I believe that one of the main reasons we should reimagine leadership is because we spend a massive chunk of our lives at work. Next slide. And so just how much do we spend? It's estimated that the average person spends about 90,000 hours in an organization in their lifetime. That's about 1/3 of our lives. And then another third of our lives is spent sleeping, right? So basically half of our lives is spent in the workplace. So maybe the workplace is worth reimagining. Next slide. And so, not quite that one. Thank you. PowerPoint's doing that thing where you hit next and it goes like 2 in advance, but that's okay. We're going to roll with it. And so here at nRhythm, we recognize, and actually so many women that I've connected with in this room, just maybe a moment to give a shout out to some of the other incredible women from the nRhythm team in this room and the broader community that are here with us today. I think we've all come together because we recognize that the dominant model and the dominant metaphor for our organizations is really the machine, right? You just need to think about the language that we use when we're leading our organizations or working on teams. We use language like, we want this to work like a well-oiled machine, got to move the needle on that, we got to hit the reset button. So imagine how this metaphor has influenced how we lead our organizations. Next slide. Here are the results from a quick Google search. On the left, your business as a machine, and you see all the cogs of the different departments and how they fit together to be a profit engine. And then on the right, from Inc. magazine, 5 ways to run your company like a well-oiled machine. What does this say about people, right? If our organizations are machines, who are we? Next slide. So we ask ourselves the question, what are the consequences of leading organizations as machines, and therefore humans as parts of that machine. Next slide. It's gonna be one of those days. So every year, I think someone may have already mentioned Gallup in the previous session, or maybe it was McKinsey, but there's this study that's done every year by Gallup, which is a research, well, they're an organization that studies workplace trends, and they look at employee engagement. And in 2021, only 34% of people were engaged at work. That means 66% of people are disengaged. And this is a self-assessment. People self-identify in the organizations that Gallup studies. And so I feel like there's a whole lot of lost potential here. Like, just think about any organization you're part of and imagine 66% of people being disengaged. And of course, there's all kinds of reasons for that, right? Engagement is a reflection of workplace conditions. And I think just many pointed to how the pandemic has impacted women, right? In the workplace, record numbers of women are having to leave the workplace because of the pandemic, because they need to care for others in their lives. And so I just wanted to kind of surface that when we're talking about this, the design of our organizations really on a broad scale isn't serving people, particularly women. Next slide. And one before. It's not serving the planet either. This is the Living Planet Index, which is a reflection of global biodiversity on planet Earth. And many of you here are familiar with this data that's indicating that global biodiversity is rapidly declining. And it's widely accepted now that that's a result of anthropocentric or human-based causes. So the design of our organizations, when we think about them super broadly, right, from our businesses, but also to our institutions and our economy, it's not serving the planet. Next slide. And then from an equality perspective, when individuals are worth more than entire countries, the design's not working from that perspective either. And from an equality perspective, we can also look at other issues that were brought up today, like the pay of women in the workforce, women leaving the workforce during the pandemic to care for family, women in leadership roles versus the number of men in leadership roles, right? There's all these things about how we've designed our institutions and our systems that have led to a heck of a lot of inequality. Next slide. But guess what? It was designed this way. Actually, instead of we, I almost want to say it was designed this way by others who preceded us and continues to be designed this way. So at nRhythm, we see this really as a design issue, right? But what if our organizations and our projects and our social systems aren't machines? What if they're living, right? What if we see them as living systems instead of machines? So we can choose to design to a new metaphor. Next slide. So in 60 seconds, where the mechanistic metaphor came from, why we've chosen to design our organizations in this way. This way of thinking arose out of 1500 to 1700 in Europe, at a time where Newton and other great thinkers were making these breakthroughs in science. And they provided a paradigm that was characterized by logic, rationalism, prediction, control, cause and effect. And this really formed the basis for the foundation for much of our Western civilization. And Newton's laws were so convincing that we spent the next 300 years up until today applying this reductionist mechanistic approach to all aspects of the human endeavor. And during that time, there was a major shift towards a mechanical view of business. And the way that became dominant was business leaders wanted to be able to invest inputs through a series of best practices and carefully defined steps that would deliver predictable outcomes that they wanted to achieve. Doing that would be the path to success, to creating a successful business. I mean, doesn't sound too bad, does it? Next slide. And this mechanistic thinking became dominant, but it was in deep contrast to so many views of reality held by so many philosophical and wisdom and spiritual traditions at the time. And it continues to be in contrast to many, even though it's become the dominant model, particularly here in the West. And some of those traditions include, at least that we at nRhythm have come across in our work, include traditions like Buddhism, paganism, especially indigenous wisdom through different countries like all over the world, really, South Africa, New Zealand, Peru, Australia, many Native Americans. And so we recognize that this was really not at the time it was in deep contrast to many views held all over the world. Next slide. And we recognize that this mechanistic worldview has since been imposed on the world through systems like colonialism, slavery, white supremacy, systemic racism, and the patriarchy. So many of those systems that the women on the panel before this were pointing to and really being radically honest about. And this way of thinking was advanced and reinforced by capitalism. People became cogs in the machines, right? And it became an excuse to extract from people and planet. And this became the dominant model for our organizations and most of our social systems. And those other views became more and more pushed into the background. Next slide. So we believe that our redesign needs life. And I know so many of you here on this call are connected to regeneration through agriculture, architecture, and other practices. And so we really, I think we all are here because we recognize that we need to regenerate the systems we are a part of. And that's inspiring to me. Next slide. Was that really the next slide? Oh, one before. There one before?
Okay.
There we go. Thank you, PowerPoint. So this is a diagram. In Rhythm, we call it our 2 triangles diagram. We are not graphic artists. Help someone. But if anyone has inspiration, we call this our 2 triangles, and it's meant to provide a little bit of contrast between machine design and living systems design. So if you take a look, maybe Tay, you could hover with your mouse over machine design. Okay, I'm going to explain it as best I can. So this is a way that we look to manage, operate, and deliver outcomes. And we recognize that machine design seeks to engineer best practices. And this approach is great if you're dealing with a complicated challenge, like baking a cake or setting up IKEA furniture. But best practices don't really have the ability to handle dense interdependencies, nonlinear change, or quickly unpredictable environments, right? But on the other hand, if you take living systems design, we believe that living systems design can inform a principle-based approach. So best practices become something that you can do when you meet a challenge, but principles really speak to who you are and how you approach a challenge. So in this way, principles are great when we're approaching complex things like our organizations, our health, these things that are complex in nature, right? Next slide. And so here at nRhythm, we offer regenerative design principles. We offer 6 of them, and we'll begin with these 3. And these principles can guide our design, our actions, and the day-to-day management of how we lead our organizations or our projects in whatever role we're playing. And so we look to holism, which is recognizing that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And with holism, we can lead in a way that values the entirety of the entire system and creates conditions for health, abundance, resilience, and impact to emerge from the contributions of all of our team members, our clients, and our partners. We design with interdependence in mind, which recognizes the real complexity of our deep relationships with our clients, our partners, and even our competitors. Uniqueness, which really fosters the expression of the uniqueness of all members within the greater context and purpose of an organization. Next slide. One before. Other way. Oh, different direction.
Wait, what?
You're going forward instead of backward. I just want to show the second principle slide.
Is this the right way? Oh, okay.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you, Tay. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. So 4th principle, evolutionary, right? We can lead in a way that responds to and creates change in our organizational environments because we recognize that living systems are changing all the time, right? They're not static, they're living, they're evolving. 5th, nodal. We lead in a way that doesn't rely on centralized command and control structures. Everyone in a system can be a resourced, empowered decision maker. And then lastly, developmental, which is about creating the conditions for all members to grow and thrive in conjunction with the health of the system. Next slide. So again, grounding us in the two triangles, we recognize, right, in machine design, we're engineering best practices that reinforce prescriptive responses and structures to challenges. But in a living systems design, we're informing principle-based approach that can then inform and facilitate the use of flexible frameworks that allow us to operate and work with complexity in ways that we don't currently do. Next slide to the framework. Just the framework to before. Yeah, thanks, Tay. So this is a framework that we offer through nRhythm that we utilize in this process. And like many design consultants, we're facilitating conversations. Why do you do what you do? What's your deep why? What's the work you want to accomplish? How do you want to accomplish it? How are you going to measure it? But what's unique about nRhythm's approach is recognizing that outcomes and emergence are a result of creating conditions for health. So that second square, rectangle, vertical, rectangle, health is so key when we're working with living systems. And I think many of you mentioned today in the context of women's leadership care, right? How do we care for the health of our organizations in a way that, yes, we can have outcomes, and we're all about that. And yes, we've come together to get stuff done and do work, but really, how do we do it in a way that creates more health and more life? And so that's really something that we bring as nRhythm through this framework that we use to facilitate design. Next slide. So in summary, and then we're going to move into Sherry's story. We believe that living systems inform a principle-based approach that facilitate the use of frameworks that help us work with complexity. And that ultimately regenerates the health of the system and allows it to be self-regenerative and self-maintaining. But that requires substantial shifts in our mindsets, our behaviors, our practices, our operations. It's not easy shifting from what's been the dominant worldview for over 300 years. And I really believe that in this kind of community, we can support one another as we go through those shifts. And so before we have one more slide, next slide, I wanted to share a quote from the founder of nRhythm, Trey Cates, who many of you here know, just to kind of ground us in today. And he says, the most important thing we can do as leaders is to create conditions for health, connection, and understanding the whole. Your number one responsibility as a leader should be creating conditions, period. It's about the environment that is being created and how people feel within that environment. So with that, next slide, I am really excited to introduce the incredible Sherry Hess. Sherry is the founder of the Flavor Remedy. She is a Tedx speaker. She's going to share more about her work, so I'll keep my intro brief. She's also an nRhythm fellow, so we have the pleasure of spending this whole year with her, really learning about her work, learning from her about flavor, and really bringing regeneration to life in her work. And so she's here to share a little bit about her regenerative leadership story. And so I'll hand it over to you, Sherry.
Alex, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I feel honored to be among such amazing women. So my name is Sherry Hess, and as Alex mentioned, my business is called the Flavor Remedy. It has been a 6-year journey around food and flavor, and I so appreciate it. I want to just reflect real quickly on what Laura Dickinson was sharing around the work she's doing with natural food and the challenges. And I was particularly struck by the comment that you made about the companies that are going into business, with all this integrity and all this passion and all this heart and soul. And then when it gets, bought out by a big company, which is ultimately the goal in food, then, the heart and soul disappears. That's a little bit of my story. When I started off as an entrepreneur, I actually was creating spice blends and quickly figured out that I did not want to put my time, energy, and all of my resources into that very broken system of food costing and everything. So what is the flavor remedy? The flavor remedy is actually this grand idea that I have to save the world through flavor. And what that means is that I believe that if we start to give more reverence to our sense of taste as our innate tool to detect nutrition, we can really make massive shifts in the world and how we choose the food that we're going to eat, and how we also in that process are supporting regenerative farmers like Farmer C, who are doing the right thing in the world to bring more flavor. And by flavor, what I'm really saying is nutrients and better health to us and to the planet. So, part of my vision is to create, Alex talked about creating conditions, right? Create what I want the flavor remedy to do is create conditions for big changes in the food industry. And that is an overwhelming task. So, and my mission is really to bring multiple industries together under this arcing idea that flavor is meant to be something that is providing. It's a body language. It provides nutrition to us through this lens, through our sense of taste. And what that means is bringing together all these different industries: regenerative farmers, grocery stores, restaurants, people in the nutrition world. There's so many opportunities for that I see as a way to do this, right? And here's the thing: I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in all these fields. And Lara actually pointed to this too when she was talking about all the different new communities that she's bringing up, all these mentorship circles around all these different things. And all of a sudden she realized she couldn't do it all. And she needed to just lean back on the expertise of the other people that were in these circles with this same passion. So what this all leads to, in my experience with nRhythm, is kind of this aha that came out when we were diving into Nodal Leadership. So in the Regenerative Design Lab, it's a power-packed experience. It is a opportunity to go through all those principles. And I know in that short, window of slides, it's a lot of information to take in. But when you get the chance to dive in and actually listen to others and hear their experiences and see how these principles fit into play, not only does it bring you a lot of hope, but it also brings you, in my case, a lot of relief. So what Nodal Leadership is, that was the thing that was my big aha during my process with the design lab, is this idea that you're decentralizing the structure of leadership. So instead of this top down, Lara felt like she had to know it all and have all the answers for all the people in the community. When you break up your leadership idea to this idea that it's nodal, and you're honoring the gifts and the genius of the individuals that are coming into play, all of a sudden there's this huge sense of relief. And honestly, if I hadn't come to nRhythm in this community and this past year through this fellowship program, I was very, very much on the verge of just giving up, because I was of this belief that I needed to know it all, that I need to understand everybody's perspective, that I needed to know what it was like to be a farmer, what it was like to be a restaurateur, what it was like to be, a food manufacturer. And I have dabbled in those things. Like, my background is culinary, but I've been a gardener my whole life. And I have all these like little bitty nuggets of information that has brought this passion around food to light, but I'm not the expert in these things. So when I started to kind of see this, and my vision for the flavor remedy has always been a gathering of community. It's always been about bringing all these different industries together under this idea that flavor should be represented by nutrients. When I could sit back and think about designing my business from the aspect of, I'm going to lean into these leaders. I'm going to take these leaders in, if it resonates with them, to use this message of flavor and nutrients, and then seeing how that can drive anybody with taste buds choice and using flavor as more of a quality standard, then I can lean back and I don't have to know it all. And I can embrace the genius of their gifts and give autonomy, because that's part of it too. It's about the leaders in nodal leadership. Each leader takes control and has the autonomy. So all of a sudden, I don't have to know it all. I just have to continue my passion and continue to share this idea, this overarching idea, and then keep the health of the organization there, right? So that quote that Alex just put up, that Trey talked about, like your job as a leader is to create the conditions of health around, what you're trying to build, and then see what emerges. And that is so exciting to me. And it also
the conditions of health around the community you
has
try to build.
allowed me to keep going, because it was overwhelming. It became so overwhelming that I thought, I can't do this. So that was really what I wanted to just, share with you all around this regenerative design lab that nRhythm does. There's so much power in it. There's so much hope in it. And it really brings to light this idea that I know as women, we have a lot of big ideas. A lot of you out there have these overwhelming, really big ideas, and sometimes you can get frozen in your tracks. So the sisterhood that everyone has shared, I so appreciate, the circles that everyone has been talking about. I so appreciate that this kind of information is out there, because it makes a big difference. So I had asked Alex if I could share my experience around the nodal leadership, because for me, that was in this particular design lab. I'm sure in the next one that I do, it's going to be a whole different principle that I attach myself to and just kind of link arms with. But the experience is phenomenal. The people that I've met are phenomenal. And just to see the change in the world is really powerful. So thank you for letting me share my story. And I so appreciate being here.
Thank you, Sherry. Such a great example of regenerative design at work, right? How it can unleash potential that was dormant. It was always there, but it's just unleashed because you're thinking about it, your mindset shifted. And I think, what you're sharing around creating conditions and health, that is so core to the approach of so many of us who identify as women. And so just thank you for sharing your story. You're always an inspiration to me. So we'll share more about the design lab invitation. There's going to be an invitation for anyone who's interested to co-create what this container could be like in the future. So I'll share more about that at the end. But I want each of you, while Tay is going to share the screen again, if I could ask you to, Tay, please. Thank you. I would like to invite each of you to grab a piece of paper, or if you want to type reflections, you could grab a note or a Word doc or whatever you want to use to capture some reflections. And I want to spend the next couple of minutes giving us each space. We're going to stay together in the main room to reflect on, based on what you've heard today, throughout all of today, what does regenerative leadership mean to you? We're all here, a part of leading different organizations who are really kind of coming together around this idea of regeneration. But what does regenerative leadership mean to you? And I'll pause and I'll give us 2 or 3 minutes just to reflect for ourselves, and then I'll give it the next prompt. You could write down words. You can draw if you're inspired to draw. Whatever is coming through you, just trace it. one more minute. All right, next slide, Tay. Thank you. The next thing I want you to reflect on, or I would invite you to reflect on, is to think back and choose one experience or a couple of experiences in organizations that you have been a part of. And think about, when have you experienced maybe a more mechanistic approach to leadership? And then when have you experienced a regenerative approach to leadership? And how were those two experiences different? Just think about it. We'll spend 5 minutes this time. Just write down some of your reflections about these questions. All right, about 2 more minutes. And for those who are open to moving on to the next part, what I'd like to invite us to do next is to share in the chat. What's one thing through these exercises and all of today that you've noticed about your own leadership or the leadership of others? How does this relate to feminine leadership? Feel free to drop reflections in the chat. When you're ready, of course. Thank you, Megan. I'll repeat. So what we want to invite you to do next is reflect in the chat. What's one thing that you noticed about your own leadership or the leadership of others through this exercise? Or how does what you're learning about regenerative leadership compare, or what similarities do you see to feminine leadership? Awesome. We have some reflections coming into the chat, and I'd invite us all to read them. Just spend a few moments reading them as they come in. Beautiful. I'm seeing greater energy flow, more energized when I'm in a regenerative system. The more I focus on regenerative leadership, the more authentic I am in every reaction. Women innately feel a pull towards collaboration, but sometimes we're suppressed to follow the domestic approach to keep our voices quiet. Beautiful. Well, thank you all. Please keep the reflections coming into the chat, but I want to be mindful of honoring the hosts and our time. So I'll invite us to go to the next slide and just hold this reflection in our own lives and in our own practice and in our own work, and paying attention to, am I flipping into a more mechanistic approach, or am I honoring a living systems approach? I'd also just love to invite you all on Thursday at lunchtime. The nRhythm team will be hosting a session about the Regenerative Design Lab and the container that's coming up, because we would love to create a space to really co-design the possibilities for what this community could look like into the future, and how we can support one another on a more ongoing basis. So we'll share more about that on Thursday at lunch. If anyone would like to join us, we would love to have you all there. So thank you.
Bravo. You did such a good job, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Sherry.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Really impressive, beautiful flow, and leading us through and giving sort of an inkling of the kind of value from the program. The nRhythm team, the Regenerative Rising team, did the program with nRhythm back in 2020, and it was truly profound. And we've done some continued visioning work as a group using that system, and it just literally offers up completely new frames for how you can think about co-creating with your team, how to frame the questions about, what gives you energy, and what are the different ways to think about roles from a living systems perspective, which, honestly, most of us do not know what this is. We are all steeped in a mechanistic orientation. It's in so much of how we relate to reality that, without having something that takes you into a new context to think about and a new language to use, honestly, I can't advocate enough for doing this work, for taking advantage of what we're offering at the conclusion of this gathering. Trey and I have co-hosted the Regenerative Earth Summits over the years. He is a brother. This family is family, and you will just be joining a community of people who bring their true hearts together, and it just will empower how you're each showing up in the world. It's really so worth the investment of time and a little bit of money.